Hello, everybody. Recording live from somewhere.
Welcome to another edition of the At Odds MMA show. I am one of your hosts, Brad Taschuk, and I am joined, as always, by my co-host. And for the second week in a row and ongoing from this point, that co-host is Gabe Killian. Gabe, how you doing today?
Great, man. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. Coming off a fun weekend of fights, so that's good. And we've actually got a little bit of a break coming up here for the holiday season. You know, the UFC respects family time, so I appreciate that. And we'll pick things back up, you know, in a big way next weekend with UFC 168. But for this week, we've got a little bit of a slower show. So what we're going to do for you guys is a recap of UFC on Fox 9. And we're actually going to do a little bit of a year in review type of show. So that should be good. And then also what we're going to do is, as a site, MMA Oddsbreaker, rather than doing just your normal year in review type stuff like we're going to cover on the podcast here, we're actually going to do a year in betting, which is a little bit unique to the site, and it's going to cover some categories that are going to be of a whole lot more interest to people who bet on the sport than, you know, fighter of the year, fight of the year, all that stuff, even though that stuff's obviously fun to talk about as well. So what we're going to do, get in here quickly, and we're just going to start with the UFC on Fox 9 recap. As always, what we like to do is start off with our most impressive performances. So Gabe, who stood out to you the most on UFC on Fox 9?
Most impressive performance. I'm gonna have to go with Fun Size, Zach Makovsky.
Nice.
Yeah, he came off his 5-round title fight, short notice, came against Scott Jorgensen, made weight, came out with an impressive win. I was impressed with him.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people were, you know, really sort of writing Makovsky off in this fight. They thought the drop to flyweight was going to be just what Scott Jorgensen needed. You know, he'd be able to overpower Makovsky, but, you know, I tried to warn everybody last week that Makovsky's made a lot of improvements. Technically his striking's got a lot better, and, you know, he really showed that off in the cage and made me look like a genius for once. So thank you, Zach Makovsky.
Yeah, I initially really liked Jorgensen. I was planning on making a big play on him. Then after some more tape study, I couldn't make a big play, but I still made a small play on him, and unfortunately came out on the losing end.
Yep. Sometimes that happens, but it's good that, you know, you reviewed things and made that a little bit smaller, because, you know, sometimes losing a little bit of money, it can just chalk it up to a lesson learned as opposed to losing a whole lot of money and being pissed off.
Yeah.
As for me, the most impressive performance, I would have to say, goes to Uriah Faber. A lot of people thought that Michael McDonald was just going to be too young, too good in the striking, too much power, and turns out that Uriah Faber actually rocked McDonald a few times on the feet. And then as soon as they got into scramble mode, Faber was just able to wrap up that guillotine. He always does it. I love the way he does a guillotine. I actually saw, you know, Jake Shields sort of breaking this down one time in a fight magazine or something, but, you know, using the half guard and the one butterfly hook to get the guillotine, and it makes it a whole lot easier to flip the guy over and get top control with it. And Faber's a master at doing that. So very, very impressed by Uriah Faber. What did you think about him?
Great performance, came out and delivered. It was beautiful. And it was only one of 2 submissions on the entire card, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah,
Not many decisions.
I think, 7 of the first 8 fights or something all went to decision on this card. It was pretty crazy that everything was going the distance, but they were still, for the most part, fairly entertaining fights. You know, we didn't see any snoozers like we often see when there are that many decisions.
Yeah.
In terms of your least impressive performance, who would you say that goes to?
I'm gonna have to go with, again, Scott Jorgensen. Same fight. Yeah, I just expected more out of him at 125, you know. I expect him to at least have a better game plan going in.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Really seemed like, you know, not really that many people brought it up before the fight, but Jorgensen was getting outspeeded by a lot of 135ers. And, you know, I don't know why people thought that would change at 125, but he's really just sort of trapped between the two divisions, you know, a little bit too big or a little bit too small for 135 and a little bit too slow for 125.
Yeah.
I'm sure he's still going to find success because obviously the guy's an excellent fighter, but, you know, it's just going to be one of those cases where he's never really going to be able to make it to the top of either division.
Yeah, I agree.
As for my least impressive performance, I'm going to have to go with, there's a couple that sort of stood out to me, but I think in the end, it's going to have to be Mac Danzig. You know, Mac Danzig, pre-fight, he sort of seemed like his heart wasn't in it too much, and then during the fight, you know, even though he did some damage to Joe Lauzon's one of those guys that gets busted up really easy, but Mac Danzig really just got dominated, especially on the ground in this fight. Lauzon was passing guard, getting to mount easily. You know, he didn't worry about going for arm bars constantly and losing position because he knew he'd just get it right back. So, not great for Mac Danzig, especially being on Fox, and this could be the end of his run in the UFC.
Yeah, it probably is.
I think there's a couple of the guys on this card that goes for. Danzig, Cody McKenzie.
I don't think McKenzie has one loss, so I don't think he'll get cut. But maybe because of the short stint. But Dana White didn't say anything that would imply he'd be cut. I think he'll get another fight. He only has one loss.
Okay, yeah, I can see him sticking around. But does anybody really think that Cody McKenzie is a UFC caliber fighter?
Yeah, I think his cousins do. But,
yeah, maybe mom and dad.
Pat Healy might get cut because he has 2-1 now, 2 losses and a draw. I mean, no contest.
No contest, and that failed drug tests, and and he didn't look too great out there either. But I chalk that a little bit more up to Bobby Green just being a good matchup for him. I expected that Healy was going to do pretty well in that fight, but Bobby Green has definitely improved as far as his takedown defense goes, and obviously he's really tightened up his striking. He used to throw a lot of haymakers, things like that, and now he's really crisp with his punches.
Yeah, he's really improved. He needs to keep his hands up, though. The shoulder roll is not always going to work. He's going to get knocked out one day.
Yeah, especially when Pat Healy was tagging him quite a bit. Healy's not a very fast striker or, you know, a great striker by any means, and he was having a fair amount of success in that fight as well.
Mm-hmm.
The other guy I think that needs to watch out for the pink slip is Roger Bowling. I can definitely see him getting cut after that performance. He just got absolutely destroyed by Abel Trujillo.
Definitely, and I'd probably say on second thought I'd probably pick Trujillo over Makovsky as the most impressive performance because between their last fights within the past 3 months, Trujillo's striking has improved drastically. I did not expect that at all. It was crazy how much he improved in the striking department, man. He looked like a beast on the feet.
Yeah, you know, in the first fight, I thought Bowling had a little bit of the edge, but they looked like two completely different fighters coming out this time. You know, it was just no match at all.
I saw no improvement from Bowling, but tons of improvement from Trujillo.
Yep. As far as the results go, let's break those down for you guys here. In the main event, Demetrius Johnson retains his title by finally getting that elusive knockout, and he put Joseph Benavidez to sleep in a big way. right early on in the first round. So very impressive performance by Demetrius Johnson. Sort of puts to bed that myth that Joe Rogan keeps saying that you're either born with power or you're not. Cause obviously just through speed and proper technique, Demetrius Johnson's starting to develop quite a bit of power in his strikes. So very, very impressed by him.
Yeah, that was a beautiful, unexpected knockout.
Where do you think?
What's that?
Where do you think Joseph Benavidez goes from here now?
No idea, man. There are really no challenges for him in the division. In my article I wrote for the matchup predictions, I had an idea that Nate Diaz and Joe Lozon should be coaches on The Ultimate Fighter for flyweights, where the flyweights compete for a contract and a title shot. Just something to get more fighters in the division and get a new contender for the guy. There's really no one on the roster right now that's a challenger.
Yeah, Demetrius Johnson's really sort of cleaned out the top of that division, and that's something that we actually talked about last show. We weren't quite sure where the UFC was going to go with the next contender, and I think in the meantime they made a fight between John Lineker and Ali Bagatinov. So whoever wins that, if Lineker makes weight and wins, or if Bagatinov wins, then that'll probably be the next title shot, don't you think?
Yeah, I think so, but if Lineker wins, that's going to be a scary situation for them, because what if he doesn't make weight the next time out? I think they need him to make weight at least twice in a row before giving him a title shot, but who knows what they'll do.
Yeah, they might not have the luxury of having that much time to wait.
Yeah.
We had already talked about Uriah Faber getting the win over Michael McDonald, so he probably earned himself another title shot with that, because that's his fourth win in 2013, a couple of them over very good fighters, and really there's nobody in the division other than the guys right at the top of the division. The two guys holding the belts that are about to fight in 2014 that Faber hasn't beaten. So I think he gets a title shot next.
Yeah, he definitely is getting a title shot. I think Dana White said he's going to fight the winner of Cruz and Barao.
Yeah, so and I think there was a time when, people complained about Faber constantly getting title shots, but I don't think anybody could justify complaining about him getting this title shot at all. He's definitely proved that he deserves this one.
He's worked his way up to it, definitely.
Yep. Chad Mendes, apparently sick with the flu, but still pretty much dominates Nick Lentz. I saw some people score the third round for Lentz, but Mendes still got takedowns, almost submitted him at one point, so I had this as a clean sweep for Chad Mendes. Obviously, he didn't go out there and really fight like a minus 900 fighter, but definitely still got the job done. And is Jose Aldo next in his future?
I'm not sure. I don't know if he's next, or if Cub Swanson is next, or if they'll fight each other. I don't know. But that's like kind of stacked at the top of that division right now in terms of who's next in line for the shot. Could be him though, but Cub Swanson has a pretty good case for the title shot too, so it's hard to say.
Yeah, for some reason, it's hard for me to get behind Cub Swanson as getting a title shot. I know that the fight that he had with Aldo was a long time ago, and he's definitely made some huge improvements since then, but man, the visual of that double flying knee landing and Swanson just crumpling and bleeding from every side of his eye, it's hard for me to get past that and think that he's going to go in.
The Chad Mendes fight ended kind of similarly, but the only difference right now I'd say between them is they both have a few impressive wins, but Swanson's opponents have been more dangerous and bigger challenges, and his finishes have been more impressive, I'd say, given his opponents.
Yeah, so I make a good point there. I think that The UFC, we've seen that their primary motivator is what is going to be the biggest fight. And I think between Mendes and Swanson, neither of those guys has a huge edge in terms of notoriety or how much money they're going to bring in. So, you could very well see Cub Swanson in that spot next. We talked about Joe Lauzon and Mac Danzig. Anything you wanted to add about that fight, or can we just skip past that one?
Yeah, Joe Lauzon, I had a big play on him in his last fight against Michael Johnson. He totally let me down. He did not look like himself at all. And this time he showed up, delivered an impressive performance, picked up a win. I don't know, man, but I was a big fan until his last fight. He lost me. I guess he's back now, but I don't know. I'm still not back on the Joe Lauzon train yet. Maybe he's next time out. He needs
I think you're probably right to be in that position because, even though he looked good against Danzig, as I said, Danzig didn't look good at all in this fight, and I still think that Lauzon has been through too many wars and he is on a bit of a decline.
Yeah, he kept going after finishes against Danzig, but I don't know why he couldn't attempt to do a similar, apply a similar game plan against Johnson. He was just stuck in his head. He wasn't doing much at all. Barely even went for takedowns. I didn't get it at all.
Yep, it seems like what's going to separate him from success or failure is, if his opponent has any sort of wrestling pedigree at all. Because Danzig, never known as a great wrestler. Even Michael Johnson isn't a great wrestler, but, he can at least wrestle a little bit.
Yeah.
In the prelims, we saw Ryan LaFleur continue his undefeated streak. So he's becoming a little bit of a prospect in the welterweight division as he took out Court McGee. This was a fight, I had some people over at my house, and weren't really paying attention to this one, but watching it back, I was fairly impressed by Ryan LaFleur's striking. What did you think about this one?
I was impressed by his performance. I picked him to win, and he delivered. The guy is really great. Just took this fight on short notice, picked up an impressive win over a very game Court McGee. Nothing short but impressed, man.
The one thing that LaFleur is going to have to worry about moving forward is, it's a couple fights in a row where he's faded a bit in the third round. So, this one I'm going to give him a pass because it was on such short notice that, he probably spent most of his camp getting down to weight rather than training to actually get in fight shape. But, if he keeps that up as he moves up the division, I think it's going to end up costing him.
What's going to end up costing them?
The fact that he keeps fading in the third round.
Oh yeah, he needs to work on his conditioning, definitely.
A fight that probably had the most contentious scorecards, or the most contentious results out of the entire card was Edson Barboza getting the majority decision over Danny Castillo in a fight that pretty much everyone scored a draw. 10-8 to Castillo in the first, and then 10-9 Barboza over the next two rounds. Did you see it the same way?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, just, Castillo went out there and sort of employed that Jamie Varner game plan where you just put pressure on Edson Barboza and he does not deal with it well. Barboza, for as great as he is offensively, he is not a great defensive fighter, and Jamie Varner obviously showed that, and Danny Castillo showed that here, but Castillo just couldn't get the finish, and good on Barboza by hanging tough and coming back and taking over the fight in the last 10 minutes, but I can't help but feel that in the end, a draw would have been more justified in this fight.
Do you think you could argue a 10-8 for the second round for Barboza?
No, I don't think it was as dominant as the first round was for Castillo. Obviously, Barboza had him rocked at one point, but Castillo had him rocked and then almost choked him out a couple times and then had him rocked with some more ground and pounds. It was just, a constant stream of Barbosa just being on the line of being finished, where as Castillo definitely got hurt in the second round, but I didn't feel like it was, close to being stopped for basically the remainder of the round.
I think you could argue a 10-7 for the first round and a 10-8 for the second round.
Yeah, 10-7s, maybe it's me being around.
They are never scored. I'm saying realistically, not what they would actually ever score.
Yeah, absolutely. I just think, being around MMA judging for so long and seeing that they never even score 10-8s. Obviously we've got two examples of that recently where Ryan Bader dominated an entire fight and didn't get any 10-8s, or got one 10-8, sorry. And Danny Castillo, he dominated that first round and only got one 10-8 as well, so,
Also, he did get one 10-8.
Yeah, he got one 10-8, that's why it was majority instead of unanimous for Barbosa.
Yeah. Right.
But, yeah, just being around and seeing how little they score 10-8s, it just has sort of trained me to not even think about scoring rounds 10-7 unless they're just, 5 minutes of absolute ass whooping.
Yeah, definitely.
Next fight, we talked about this one briefly as well. Bobby Green picked up the win over Pat Healy. Scorecards in this one, they were a little bit wider than I actually expected. The fight was fairly competitive, but I did think that Bobby Green got the better of it for the most part. He's got 3 wins in the UFC now, so moving on up is Bobby Green.
Yep. And I wasn't sure who would win this fight, but I felt really positive about the over, and that cashed beautifully.
Yeah, when you've got someone like Pat Healy, I think we talked about this last week, when you've got someone like him who is durable and at the same time not a great finisher himself, you're going to get that over more times than not.
Yeah, people were betting the under on that fight. I didn't get that.
Yeah, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
And for anyone who didn't get a chance to check it out, one of the other podcasts on MMA Oddsbreaker, the Parting Shot podcast with Adam Martin and James Lynch, they did an interview with Bobby Green prior to the event. Really good interview. Bobby Green sort of opens up about a lot of stuff, and it doesn't give your typical MMA responses. So go check that interview out if you haven't had a chance to do that yet. And at the same time, I think with Bobby Green, having a lot of success, I think he's made, $110 or something $1,000 in the UFC this year. I think it's time that he gets his own place and quits living on his brother's couch.
Yeah.
Next fight we talked about a few times already. Jorgensen drops his flyweight debut to Zach Makovsky. So obviously that puts Makovsky right in the mix at flyweight. Maybe another win or two could get him close to a title shot. Although, given the styles, I really don't like his chances against Demetrius Johnson if he gets there.
Yeah, I think if he picks up another win or two, he'll definitely get there, especially because he was just a champion.
Yep.
Maybe one more win.
Yeah, I could see either one or two more wins depending on how some of those other fights go and what sort of timeline they need to get on for the flyweight division.
Mm-hmm.
Next, Cody McKenzie just really sort of got beaten up for 15 minutes against Sam Stout. You could tell that Stout was trying to stop him with body shots for a whole lot of the fight. It looked like McKenzie had somebody take a paintbrush and paint red right on his stomach with some of the marks that were on there. And, of course, there was the whole fiasco with Cody McKenzie's shorts, because apparently he's just, a drunken mess and forgot his shorts and mouth guard and everything back at his hotel room. So somebody ran out just before the fight and grabbed him a pair of Nike shorts that had pockets in them. So the first time I've ever seen somebody fight MMA with shorts that have pockets in them. And I've watched quite a bit of shitty MMA.
Did you see the picture Mike Dolce tweeted of his shorts? After the fight, McKenzie took his shorts off. He tossed them in the bathroom or in the locker room somewhere.
No.
Dolce, it was up for grabs for anyone, I guess.
I did not see that.
Yeah. Man, guy's a character. I don't know why he went back to 155 though. Was he having trouble making weight? Probably, I guess.
I heard some things about, people seeing him out after fights, either previously or maybe he was out after this fight, and he was over at the bar, drinking and smoking and stuff like that, so maybe
he always does that.
Not taking things too seriously, and that's why he's back up at 155.
Yeah, he never had a proper diet, but the guy picked up a win in his last fight, so it was strange for him to come back up, but I guess he's just fighting for a paycheck more than anything else, so.
Seems
whatever.
like it, yeah. I wonder if you can write those shorts off to keep expenses down.
Well, what do you want to see Sam Stout do next? I'd like to see him fight Barboza.
I was actually going to say, Barboza is a good one, but I'd also like to see him take on Abel Trujillo. I think that would be a good fight as well.
It would, yeah. I think the Barboza fight would be like a good kickboxing battle.
Yep. Yeah, I think both of those, either one of those, give Sam Stout fights with strikers, because we know if he's fighting guys who can't defend takedowns, like Spencer Fisher and stuff like that, he's just going to take those guys down and sort of pick up cheap wins. But give him guys that, like Barboza, like Trujillo, I'm sure there's a ton of other examples in the lightweight division. Bobby Green, guys who have good striking and pretty decent takedown defense that can keep him on the feet. And I think you're going to get some fun fights out of him.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of Trujillo, he obviously picked up the knockout win over Roger Bowling. He wasn't afraid to go back to the knees on the ground, as this time he made it pretty obvious that he threw it to the body instead of to the head. So he used that to help him secure the TKO win in the second round. Very, very impressive performance by Abel Trujillo, and definitely a lot of improvement out of him.
Yeah, man. Like I said, I can't remember the last time I saw a fighter improve that much in that short time, 3 months. It was incredible.
Yep.
He took his striking up like 3 levels.
Absolutely. And, everything came up a little bit. Takedown defense, it all looked pretty good. And his cardio looked better than it has in the past as well.
Definitely.
And finally, to kick off the night, Alp Oskilic picks up the decision win over Darren Uenoyama. A fight that was scored a lot closer than I had it. I had Oskilic sweeping the fight all 3 rounds. I just thought that, he did basically what we said last week. He kept it on the feet, and he was able to outstrike Uenoyama, land the better punches, and to me at least, he made it pretty clear that he won.
Yeah, I think Uenoyama screwed himself by pulling guard consistently. Because he was winning some of the exchanges on the feet, but he was tired and he just kept pulling guard, and that did not suit him well because it just cost him the rounds.
Yeah, pulling guard against a wrestler, never a great move, because chances are they're going to have a pretty good base, be difficult to sweep, and, as long as they've done a little bit of homework, you don't see a whole lot of submissions from the bottom anymore.
Yeah, man.
So.
All right. Good outing by Alpetkin Oskilic.
Yep, the Turkish delight.
Yeah.
So another new player in the UFC's flyweight division. So they are definitely working to expand that division, which is quite nice, because for a while there it had, like 12 fighters. I think they're up to 22 or 26, something like that, that I read recently. So, and that'll be good to have more people in the division, as we definitely need more challengers at the top of it.
What do you think about my idea of Joe Lozon and Nate Diaz being Ultimate Fighter coaches of flyweights who compete to win a title shot?
I can see that happening. I think there's still enough flyweight talent out there that they can do something, sort of like they're doing with the women's 115-pound division, where, they're just bringing in almost all of the top fighters that are outside of the UFC right now and saying, here, we're going to make this show actually mean something.
Yeah.
So I can see it happening, although from a betting perspective, I hate that they put good fights on Tough, because I want to be able to bet those fights rather than, just watch them on tape delay, and I want to see good fighters, preferably I want to see them fight 5 rounds, but I would definitely prefer to see them fight 3 rounds instead of 2, so a couple drawbacks to the Tough idea.
Yeah, well, they'd be fighting in the finale, so you'd still get the bet on them, just.
Yep. Yeah. So, but I definitely think that the way they're going with the Ultimate Fighter, where they're trying to make it more relevant, that's definitely what they have to do if they want to keep the show going. Personally, I'd just prefer that they scrap the entire thing and, do weekly fight cards or bi-weekly fight cards in the same slot, but that's just me. I prefer real fights over, watching 40 minutes of people stuck inside of a house going stir crazy.
I'd like to see another comeback season.
Yeah, the comeback was pretty entertaining, I have to admit, but I think if they do a comeback season, then they definitely have to bring in Matt Serra as one of the coaches, because Matt Serra is one of the best cornermen in MMA, and maybe on the other side bring in Mark Coleman or somebody like that. So just have 2 people who are just gonna absolutely yell and scream, and have those guys make the fights a little bit more interesting.
Yeah, that'll work.
Alright, that does it for the UFC on Fox 9 recap. What we're going to do now, because as I said, we don't have any cards coming up this week. There is a Glory kickboxing card from Tokyo that features a welterweight tournament, some good heavyweight fights as well, but we're not here to break down kickboxing. So we're going to get into some year-in review type stuff. So you see this on basically every site, just people's takes on fight of the year, fighter of the year, KO, and sub. So we're just going to take a look at those 4 major categories. So what we will do, we'll start from the bottom up, and save the best for last. And so I usually consider the fight of the year the best of those awards. So we'll start off with sub of the year. And the way that Gabe and I have gone through and done this is we've picked 2 subs. One that's sort of like the coolest sub, something that's a little bit unique but probably didn't get as much press, and then one that's sort of the best sub. So what would you have as your first submission, Gabe?
Chael Sonnen guillotine over Shogun Hua.
Definitely a good one. I'm not sure that anybody expected that to happen. I certainly didn't when that fight came around. To be honest, I thought that fight was going to play out a whole lot more like the Shogun Tahuna fight than it ended up.
Yeah, I thought it was going to go to a decision or something. I did not expect Sonnen to be the one that finishes the fight. I thought if he got finished, it'd be Shogun putting him out, as you did.
Yeah. For my best sub, I will say that it is Anthony Pettis winning the UFC lightweight title over Ben Henderson. The reason for that is, you look at Ben Henderson's career, he's been in trouble a million times with submissions. Basically the entire first fight with Donald Cerrone, he was in submission attempts for 25 minutes almost, and he always managed to escape. And then Anthony Pettis comes along, lands some good kicks, gets taken down going for something a little bit stupid, and then instantly locks up an armbar, and it's just smooth as hell. And even though that's Ben Henderson's nickname, Pettis takes the title. So that was the best submission for me of the year. And then in terms of the other submission, what would that be for you, Gabe?
Another guillotine, Georgie Karakine over Lance Palmer. Just because how it happened, he was losing the round and then just transitioned, got the neck. Lance Palmer moved. He moved with him. It was a beautiful transition. Just caught him beautifully and got the tap, man. Like I said on the last podcast, it's, I think, the most beautiful guillotine I've ever seen.
Yeah, it's one of those things, you don't see a lot of guillotines where the guys already have their positions established. One guy on top, the other guy has the guy in his guard. So, but Georgie managed to pull it off there.
Yeah.
For mine, there were a couple subs throughout the year that I thought were very cool. I think the most unique of them has to be Kenny Robertson and what I've always called, from wrestling, a stump puller, when you take the guy's back and then basically turn it into a knee bar and, basically a hamstring tear type of submission. So, I thought that was a very cool sub. It was, nice to see it actually used effectively in high level MMA. So, Kenny Robertson gets that one for me. And an honorable mention just goes to a heel hook from Ian Entwistle that was like a flying heel hook at Cage Warriors a couple weeks ago. So very fun to watch that happen, as anybody who's gone back and seen Chonin Anderson Silva. Always an awesome thing to watch. In terms of knockout of the year, what would you have as your best knockout?
I'm going with Melvin Guillard over Mac Danzig because of how devastating it was. Mac Danzig woke up weeping, crying. It was just really terrible to watch.
Yeah, that one was definitely a little bit scary to see, and Melvin Guillard has quite the highlight reel. Body punch knockouts, knee knockouts, just punches where he's put guys just face down, dropped them like a bag of potatoes. He's got just about everything on his resume, so definitely a guy who's always in contention to pick up one of those knockouts.
Yep.
For me, I would say that this one could probably go for best and coolest, but mine's Junior Dos Santos over Mark Hunt, just for the simple fact that Junior Dos Santos was able to knock out Mark Hunt and did it by using a spinning heel kick, but a spinning calf kick in this case with how it hit. But that was just amazing for me to see the type of power that he has and to make Hunt go out like that.
Yeah, and no one saw that coming, especially because the fight was almost over and he was convincingly winning.
Yep. And they were both tired at that point, so you don't expect a 240-pound guy to spin like that and throw that kind of kick out there.
Definitely not.
What about your other KO, Gabe?
Mark Hunt again. Mark Hunt or Stefan Struve. That was an impressive knockout. Put him down like a big building.
Yeah.
Or a tree or something.
Like a skyscraper.
Yeah, exactly. The skyscraper went down. Broke his jaw. It was
in a couple places, knockout. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was brutal stuff. And that was a fight that, even though both guys were tired as hell, you could see that one coming, because Hunt was just coming forward and jumping up and throwing those left hooks like he was playing Street Fighter or something. For me, I would have to say that the coolest KO, something that happened not too long ago. It was on a recent RFA card, and it was Lyoto Machida's brother, Chinzo Machida, with possibly the most devastating flying knee that I have seen, maybe since Terry Martin and getting knocked out by James Irvin. Just brutal stuff. I heard that, I think the guy's name was Brian Wood. I heard that he fractured his jaw in a couple places. The roof of his mouth was even fractured from this knee. He was just all messed up and in bad ways, and he was out for quite a long time before they were able to, wake him up and make sure that he was, obviously there's serious damage there, but nothing life-threatening.
Yeah, that one definitely takes the cake, man. There's no competition.
Yeah.
No, devastating.
In terms of your fighter of the year, who would you have in that category?
Vitor Belfort.
The young, old lion dinosaur. Yes.
That's the one. Yeah, man. TRT or no TRT, spinach or no spinach, Coca-Cola or Pepsi. I don't know what he's doing, but the guy is knocking people out. People that don't usually get knocked out. He's impressive. You can't argue that. He's up next in line for the title shot. He deserves it. Guy's a beast. He's my fighter of the year.
Yeah, after Chris Weidman beats Anderson Silva again, maybe they can get TRT Tour off the juice long enough to have him fight outside of Brazil.
Yeah. Do you think the fight would be in Brazil, regardless if he fights Anderson or Weidman?
Well, if he fights Anderson, it's definitely going to be in Brazil. But I hope if he fights Weidman that they're going to be able to get him to fight outside of Brazil. I don't know how well that's going to go, given, tests and, athletic commissions and all those sorts of things. Mm-hmm. But it would be nice if he could fight outside of Brazil, because I think that would shut a lot of people up. Unless they go to, the UK or somewhere else that the UFC is also the athletic commission.
Mm-hmm.
For my fighter of the year, to me this one's pretty much a no contest. There's one guy, Chris Weidman. If he does beat Anderson Silva again next weekend, maybe he can be in contention for this, because beating Anderson Silva twice in a year is pretty awesome. But for me, it's Demetrius Johnson. Even if Weidman does win, I've still got it as Demetrius Johnson. He beat John Dodson, who was the number one contender. He beat Joseph Benavidez, who was the number one contender. And he beat John Moraga, who was a top 5 flyweight at the time. And 2 of those wins were by stoppage. And the other one was probably one of the more underrated fights of the year. So I've got Demetrius Johnson as my fighter of the year, and I think there's a pretty big gap after him before everyone else.
Yeah, I definitely can't argue that.
And finally, the fight of the year. There's been a ton of good fights in the UFC, in Bellator, in regional promotions, pretty much everywhere over the course of 2013. And, Gabe, I know we've got our picks for fight of the year, but I'm just going to run down some of the other fights that we're not picking that were also fantastic fights.
Run them down, Brad.
So John Jones, Alexander Gustafsson, back and forth, light heavyweight title fight, over 5 rounds. Nobody expected the fight to be as close as it was. Sort of same thing goes for Wanderlei Silva and Brian Stan. A lot of people, myself included, picked Stan to win that by TKO. I actually lost a little bit of money based on that, and Wanderlei Silva comes back, looking like he's 25 years old again. Hendricks Condit, a fight that I had the pleasure to be at live, and I kind of wish that this was being booked for the welterweight title, because the fight over 5 rounds I think would be even better than it was over 3 rounds. Obviously, Mark Hunt, Antonio Silva, great fight. TRT or not, you can't take away from what those guys did over those 25 minutes. And the list just goes on and on and on. So, a really great year for fights in 2013. But Gabe, what is your pick for fight of the year?
It's a tough one, but I'm going to have to go with Soa Palele versus Nikita Krylov.
Oh man, that was going to be my pick.
No, I'm going with the bloodbath that was Melendez versus Sanchez.
Nice. Can't argue with that. Diego, for all his faults, he's been in some great wars in MMA. Fights with Clay Guida, fights with Nick Diaz, Caro Parisian, your boy. But this might be the best fight that Diego Sanchez has been in. And man, people expected him to just get absolutely destroyed in this fight. And for what he did in the 3rd round, even if you're not calling the fight of the year, I think that's pretty damn close to being one of the rounds of the year.
I got robbed on that fight, man. Cause you agree that, Diego won the 3rd round, right?
Yeah, Diego definitely won the 3rd round.
Yeah, I had a pretty big play on him, on the plus 3.5. Right? Yeah, and one judge scored 30-27 for Melendez, so I got screwed on that.
Yeah, that's, I remember actually discussing that one a little bit with you. I think it was on Twitter. Obviously, sometimes that goes our way, and that's actually going to be one of the topics that we bring up when we do the MMA Oddsbreaker Year in Betting podcast. We're going to have our bad beat of the year, so, without bitching and moaning too much, it's kind of fun to go back and a little bit, angering to go back sometimes and seeing what wins you could have had that got taken away from you.
Yeah.
But Melendez Sanchez, long after the sting of losing that bet is gone, that fight will still be awesome.
Yep. What's your pick?
My pick for fight of the year, it's not in the UFC, which usually means that people automatically dismiss it, but Eddie Alvarez, Michael Chandler 2, I didn't think it was quite as good as the first one, but for 2 fights that 2 guys have had, I think that no other pair of fights in MMA can compare to them, and that includes, to me, Frankie Edgar and Gray Maynard 2 and 3. So I cannot wait for Eddie Alvarez and Michael Chandler to fight a 3rd time. I think by far this is going to be the best trilogy that MMA has ever seen, and I could watch these guys fight 25 times. I don't think their bodies could take it, but just 2 amazing fighters, and the way their styles match up just constantly make for entertaining fights.
Yeah, man. I've been lucky betting on their fights so far. I had Chandler as a dog the first time around, and the second time I had the over and Alvarez. I predicted him to win a split decision. So both times I've nailed those fights, and hopefully the 3rd time will be the same.
I have to admit that I thought Chandler should have got the nod in the second fight.
Yeah, me too. I scored it for him.
Pardon?
I scored it for Chandler as well, but I was happy to take the split decision.
Yep.
Yeah.
Can't complain at all about that, and obviously it sets up the trilogy as well, so, we'll get another 25 minutes or however long it takes out of these guys.
And, I was thinking let's, add another topic. Let's do, best debut of 2013. Best debut of the year.
All right. So since you brought up the topic, I'll let you go first, so I get a couple seconds here to think about it.
All right, cool. I'm going with Brandon Thatch. Two impressive first round finishes, one knockout, second submission to strikes. Guy has made a big splash in the welterweight division. I really can't wait to see him again.
Yeah, that's definitely. I remember watching him coming up on the regional circuits, and he's one of those guys where the hype definitely hasn't lied about him. Just very aggressive, very fun to watch, and devastating. I wish that Soa Palele didn't fight at UFC 79 because, man, if this was his UFC debut year and he went 2-0 with those two awesome stoppages, he would have to be up there. But instead, I'm gonna say, just because this is the first one that came to mind, my debut of the year, there's two of them that were really good on the same card, but I'm gonna go with Justin Scoggins. Very, very impressive everywhere. He's a guy that I watched on tape and sort of just fell in love with his style. And then he came into the cage and showed an even more well-rounded game than that. So, Justin Scoggins, another one of those flyweights for people to look out for moving forward.
Yeah, he's kind of similar to Brandon Thatch in that they have a really exciting striking style, and I can't wait to see him again.
Yeah, and both of those guys, obviously they've rounded out their games and added that grappling portion to it as well. So, there used to be a day and age where you could come in and just really have that one skill and be successful, but those days have long passed. Alright, so that does it for the major topics for the year in review. As I said, keep an eye out at MMA Oddsbreaker actually odds just came out for the main card of UFC 168, so if you get a chance, go and check those out. There's been a little bit of movement already, and we will discuss those odds on next week's show along with the rest of the event. And then we're going to have the year-end betting podcast that is going to be recorded over the next week when we can get the whole gang together and get it recorded. And then we're going to get it posted up onto the site. And that's something that I'm really looking forward to, seeing some of the things that have stood out to people over the past 12 months of betting on MMA. Alright, and the last thing before we go, I think we can skip the fights to go watch this week because, obviously we gave a couple great fights that people should go check out. For you, your fight of the year, Gilbert Melendez, Diego Sanchez. If you haven't seen it, you've probably been living under a rock, but you should probably go and find that tape to watch it. For me, Eddie Alvarez and Michael Chandler in their second fight. And, if you really want to, you can go back and watch the first one too. And Gabe, what should people be looking out for, I'm dying here. What should people look out for from you over the next week, and how can they get a hold of you on Twitter?
Twitter at Gabe Killian MMA, and I just put out my matchmaking articles, and we'll probably have a couple more pieces up within the next few days or so.
Perfect. So keep an eye on MMA Oddsbreaker for that stuff. For me, I'm going to be working on getting that year-in betting article and podcast all together, so keep an eye out for that in the next couple of weeks. Obviously, there are going to be more UFC 168 lines coming out. I would imagine that's probably going to be early next week. Haven't really talked to Nick about it to nail down a time yet. But the other thing that there will be on Five Dimes are odds for Glory. So if you're into the kickboxing scene, there is still going to be some combat sports for you to bet on this weekend. I am on Twitter at Brad Taschuk. The podcast is at Odds MMA. And until next week, we'll catch you later.